Good morning and welcome. We're live from the AWS Summit in Berlin today. Welcome if you're joining us on Twitch on the stream on twitch.tv/AWS. So we have quite a few viewers on the stream that are also watching some of the content from the summit here in Berlin today. My name's Ian Massingham. I'm with the Developer Technology Evangelism team at Amazon Web Services. I'm going to be hosting this panel, which is the first session that we're going to be streaming today and the first session in this Alexandria Theatre here at Station Berlin. And this first panel is a community panel, so we've brought together some leaders within the AWS developer community from across Germany this morning to have a discussion about AWS user groups and the kind of value that AWS user groups can offer to customers of the AWS cloud that choose to engage with them. We'll learn in the course of this panel, I'm sure, a lot more about what AWS user groups are and how they operate. So I'm going to be chairing proceedings, and as you might expect, the first thing that I'm going to do is just briefly ask each one of our panel members to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about where they're from, give a very, very brief history of their user group, and talk about when it was founded. So I'll turn it over to Sven first of all, if I can, at the far end of our panel here on stage this morning. Sven.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Sven Seiler. I came from Dortmund. Together with Tom, I founded the Dortmund AWS user group in 2016. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, okay. My name is Tom Lorenz, also from Dortmund, as a user group leader. And he already said everything.
We'll come to you with some more questions.
Hi, my name is Markus Ostertag. I'm a user group leader from the AWS user group in Munich. We're there for something like 4 years now and are one of the biggest user groups in Munich, Germany. Sorry.
Yeah, my name is Thorsten Höger. I'm co-organizer of the user group in Stuttgart and Frankfurt. And yeah, the Stuttgart user group started in 2012 or 13. It's a long time ago. And we restarted the Frankfurt user group starting this year.
Great. So everybody that's on the panel today, of course, has a day job running and working in some large and prominent tech companies here in Germany. Markus is smiling, by the way, because that CEO title is quite a new thing for him at Team Internet. I think he's still getting used to seeing it on the slides. But of course, we're not talking to our panelists this afternoon in the context of their professional roles. We're talking to them in the context of the leadership roles that they play here in the AWS community in Germany. And I wanted to turn to you, Tom, first of all, as you were kind of cut short in your introduction, and ask you if you could talk a little bit about why you and Sven started the user group in Dortmund. What was it that motivated you to initiate an AWS community in your city there?
Yeah, okay. We started using AWS in 2014. And then we first did some private projects on AWS and then started prototyping commercial projects on AWS. And yeah, we had a look around near Dortmund. There was Cologne, Düsseldorf as a user group, but there was not much going on there, only 2 meetups in a year. And we had the same situation with Java user groups a few years ago. And then we had to drive to Cologne, to Düsseldorf, and in the Ruhrgebiet, this takes 2 hours if you drive at 5 o'clock. So a former colleague of us founded the Java user group Dortmund, and we found this very nice from him, so we could drive only 2 kilometers to a meetup. And then we said, let's do the same for AWS. And so we did it in 2016, December, we founded the user group Dortmund. And from then on, we do meetups every 2-3 months.
Great. What about you, Markus? You've been operating for quite a long time in Munich, but what was it that first catalyzed the idea of running a user group there? Why did you decide to invest your own time in something like that?
Yeah, actually, it was 4 years ago at the AWS Summit Berlin here, where we talked with some of the AWS people and some other guys from Munich about, hey, it would be nice to have this kind of gathering, what we're seeing here now at the AWS Summit, on a more regular basis, more often, and on a community base, so not all AWS organized. We thought it makes sense to start a user group in Munich, and then we came together at the beer garden, typical Munich thing, obviously. For the first 2-3 months, every month we just met at the beer garden, drank some beer, and talked about what people are expecting from a user group, what we should do, how should we do it. And then a few months later, we kicked off kind of the first official meetup with really talks and speakers and stuff like that. And so it all began.
Okay, what about you, Thorsten? How did you get started in Stuttgart? And what was the big motivator for you to once again invest your own time in something like this, in running a community of this type?
Yeah, the main thing was we were starting to use AWS at the company I was working with and 2 colleagues, and we said, okay, let's try to connect with other users. And there was no such thing to connect with other users, especially in the Stuttgart area. People do not talk to each other about what they're doing. And so we started a user group and said, okay, let's meet with other users. We hoped to have other users that have a lot more experience than us to guide us. This was not the case, but we had other users that tried to get information from us, so it went this way, but it's okay. And since then, we're doing it monthly, so yeah, and we're still doing it. So.
Great. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what happens during one of these meetups. So maybe we turn over to the guys from Dortmund at the end here, Sven and Tom. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you structure the meetups? Is there a kind of standard agenda that you use, or is it more varied or free-form than that? What kind of techniques and tools do you use to actually structure the events that you run?
So in fact, we have somehow the same agenda every time. So we have up to now 1 speaker who is giving 1 or maybe 2 talks in the evening, and most likely we are starting at 6 p.m. Up to 9 p.m. so that we have 3 hours in between. There will be some catering, and then that we can mix up and discuss the things that are already presented then. And what I do before is to get in contact with the speakers. So that's like most of the job. Because you always have to ask everywhere around the world. So for our last user group, we had Randall Hunt in Dortmund. I just contacted him through Twitter, and he said, okay, I will come. Yeah.
If you're watching on Twitch and you're not a regular watcher of the AWS channel, I'll just say that if you look in the video on demand section on Twitch, you'll find Randall, who Sven just mentioned, one of our live coders. He does quite a lot of on-stream development work, so check out some of his material on there. But he's also, like a lot of AWS evangelists, a global traveler and supports user groups around the world.
Yeah. So I really think this was like the highlight up to now. So he was able to communicate about SageMaker and artificial intelligence from so high to so low level that everyone in the room was able to understand at least a bit. Yeah. Yep. And that was great.
And that gave us 80 new members in one day.
80,
really great.
80 in one day.
18, yeah.
80, wow. Yeah, so just let confirm one thing. You all organise these meetups via Meetup.com, right? That is the platform that everyone uses.
Yep.
Meetup.com is... actually, they're an AWS customer, but they are a platform for organising not just tech meetups, but any kind of real-world gathering that you want to arrange. That's used quite extensively in tabletop gaming and role play and political groups, all kinds of different things. And one of the nice features about the platform, of course, is geo-discovery. So if I'm signed up for a Golang meetup in Munich, then I'll see that AWS has commonality in the population of members with that group, and it'll be suggested to me in meetup.com. So if you're interested in interacting with tech communities in your local area, just use that platform, subscribe and specify where you're located, and you'll be suggested things based on meetups that you might have already joined or taken a look at on the platform. It's actually really good for discovery in that perspective. So Markus, can you talk a little bit about how you structure things down at Munich? You've been running a bit longer, so you've got to sustain the interest in the community, right? How have you gone about doing that? How have your agendas and the kind of content that you've covered evolved and changed over the 4 years that you've been running the group?
When we started, we did it exactly like the Dortmund user group did it now, like having 1 or 2 speakers, 1 or 2 talks. But I think 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, I got a tip from one of the user group leads from the Nordics from Anders that he found out that it would make sense to have kind of a recent announcements of AWS in upfront. And I asked in Munich then if that would be kind of interest, and everybody was like, yeah, absolutely, because you can't keep track on what AWS is pushing out within days. And so what I now do for every meetup, as we're meeting every month, for every meetup, I prepare some kind of recent announcements of AWS that's obviously filtered by me. Things I prefer are more on the top, and things I don't prefer are more on the, no. But obviously, as I'm sure everybody that works with AWS knows, AWS is pushing so hard on updates, new features, stuff like that, that you can't really keep track on that. And so I thought, and I still think it makes a lot of sense to aggregate this and to filter out the not so interesting things, like the new Moriah DB version 14.9.8 is now updated to version 14.9.9. If you're working with Moriah DB, I'm pretty sure you're keeping track of that. If not, it's not really interesting, at least in my opinion. So I obviously I try to keep things on a more global level, things that are more interesting, features that come out in new services or additional features in already existing services that might fit new use cases. And then I try to point out for the users in the user group, like, hey, this could be a use case I could think of. And then sometimes we also have a discussion about, does this make sense? Doesn't this make sense? And obviously also AWS gets some feedback based on that, like, hey, the feature is cool, but I'm still lack of this and that, and so there is kind of a feedback loop going back to AWS to more evolve on that.
Great. That services recap is quite common in user groups that I've worked with in other parts of the world as well, so that's a common pattern that's used across quite a few different groups. Thorsten, what about you? How do you structure the meetups in Stuttgart? Is there anything particularly distinctive about the kinds of community members in Stuttgart that have led you to change the way in which you run things, tailor the agenda more specifically, for example, and how's your group evolved over the years?
So I think we're basically doing the same thing. Sometimes we do these What's New sessions too. Not every time, but often, especially in December. We do only a What's New session after reInvent. You don't need any other topic at the meetup after reInvent, because the What's New session is 2 hours long. At least, if you filter it. What we're doing is, so we're traveling around in Stuttgart and having different location sponsors every time. So we give the sponsor some time up front to present the company and normally tell the audience that they're looking for new employees.
Yeah, the obligatory "we are hiring" slide.
Exactly. So this is the benefit that the location sponsor gets to talk some minutes up front. And this way, we prevent the location sponsor to do a talk and only do marketing.
Yeah, understand. Okay, so if you're joining us on twitch.tv/AWS, we're live from the AWS Summit in Berlin today. And what you're watching right now is a panel with AWS user group leaders from across Germany discussing some of the tricks and tips that they use to sustain user communities in the AWS community here in Germany. We're at the AWS Summit in Berlin today, as I said. So moving on with the questions that I've got on my little pad here. When you talked about your rationale for kicking things off in Munich, Markus, you talked about wanting to take the momentum that was present in a large-scale event like this summit and localize it and make it available for users in particular parts of the country. But I know that user groups are not the same as these big summit events. They're quite different in terms of the flavor and the way they feel and the kind of people that are involved in them. So can you just give me a quick summation? We'll start with you, Thorsten, and go the other way. What you think are the main differences between events that AWS runs as first-party events and the kind of events that you run, which are community-driven? Why would a user get more value potentially out of the kind of things that you do than the kind of things that we do? I'm just interested in what the difference is in your view.
So I think when a user comes to a user group, the people giving the talks are users too. So it's more a user experience talk and not something that can be perceived as a marketing talk. talk. So it's more, okay, somebody else is using it and saying it is great, so it will be great, not some sales guy saying it is great. And I think that's the main benefit the users get from user groups, that they get first-hand information from users and not from sales.
Yep. Markus, anything to add to that, or do you think the position is the same?
Obviously, that's absolutely true what Thorsten said. I think another benefit is, as you said, it's more localized, it's more regional. When you're looking at AWS Summit Berlin here, multiple thousand people are here, many people from AWS are here, and of course, AWS is approachable. You can go to the Ask an Architect booth and ask people about it, but it's not that you meet the same person every month at a specific date. So I think for us as user group leads, it's also, as we're there every month or nearly every month, we are more approachable and we are able to connect the right people inside of AWS with customers outside. So even if people approach me, for example, and that happens very often, which is good, I think, about, hey, Markus, can you please help me? Do you have some kind of experience with this or that service? And even if I don't have that kind of experience, I can connect those customers of AWS with the right person inside of the AWS company, which makes a huge benefit for both sides, obviously.
Great. And from Dortmund, the community aspect of this is something that I'm interested in. So what kind of value do you think operating in this peer-to-peer community brings to users in your group in Dortmund?
Yeah, I think another aspect is the time, because in Dortmund there's not much going on with AWS, so you have to drive the whole day to Frankfurt, or Cologne is just 2 hours, but it also takes half a work day.
People probably watching outside Germany right now thinking, but you have those really fast autobahns there, so can't you get everywhere in 15 minutes? But the problem is the country's actually really big, so it still takes a long time to get around.
There's always so much traffic jam, you don't get anywhere in 15 minutes. So, so you can go to the community meetup just after work. So
yeah, so there's a big benefit, accessibility component, right?
And you can get connected to other people in Dortmund who also have the same problem. So
yeah, that's cool.
That's great.
So something that happened here in Germany, it's happened twice now here in Germany, is the idea of this AWS Community Day, which is we're planning for the second. So can you share a little bit more about what that is and what the results were that you got from that first event, which might lead to a discussion about why you're doing it again? I'd really like to hear more about that. You were a major organizer there, Markus. So.
I think we all are major organizers of that. So yeah, the AWS Community Tech Days we had last year in September. It was 2 days in Cologne, where the whole, it was a little bit like the AWS Summit here, but not organized by AWS, which is the huge difference. As we said, the content just comes from the community for the community, so there are AWS users on stage, and a huge benefit, obviously, is the trust you can have in those speakers, because they're not PR approved, no offense. But obviously, AWS people are not allowed to say everything about AWS, but those people that are on stage at this community events are, because they're not paid by AWS, so we don't need any PR approval, and can say things about AWS like, this is not so good about AWS. Other things are obviously very, very good at AWS. And I think this is a huge benefit, that that there is a lot of trust in also telling people, hey, this is something you shouldn't try because it will break your system or it would break things at AWS, but this is your workaround. That gives you a huge benefit for those kind of conferences, because obviously at the AWS Summit, it is a marketing and sales event. I think we can say that pretty open. And the community days are a very tech-focused from the community for the community event, which is a really hands-on, just with people that are doing that on a day-to-day job and have a lot of technical experience, deep dive technical experience on the things they're talking on stage about it. And it's a lot of networking around this event. And as it was a great experience last year, we're planning to do that this year again.
I think one thing I'd say about the summits is we're trying to cater for a really broad range of different customer types here that are right from I know of AWS, but I've never logged into the console right the way through to the advanced user, and it's quite difficult to do that. The content depth at the event that you ran last year was like 300, 400 or beyond.
400 and
so
beyond.
We're talking about content for advanced users
Absolutely.
that have already got a lot of significant operational or development experience using the platform. So I know you're all involved in running the event last year. Can you, Thorsten, talk a little bit about results? How many attendees did you get? What kind of feedback did you get? How's that influencing what you're going to be doing in the next iteration of that event this year?
So last year we had around 300 attendees, I think, and it was so booked out within weeks. So it was really fast. So this year, I think we plan to have more attendees, a little bit more. Depends on the location. 500 is so the goal. And so the feedback was really great from the community because it was, as Markus said, I trust you because you really use this stuff and you really know what you're talking about. And all the attendees said, I will definitely be there at the next time. So we have to grow bigger because we want new attendees, and all the attendees from last year are coming too, so we need more space.
Great. And what sort of roles do you play in organising the event? Because you said everybody's playing a role in helping to make this a reality. So how do you split up the workload across the team that we're seeing in front of us here to help make an event like this a success? Maybe Sven and Tom, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, okay. So we are joining this event from Dortmund this time for the first time, and we are quite happy there to be responsible for one track. And so for all of you, if you are interested there to attend, we will have a track about IoT, a track about serverless computing. We have AKS track, I think, container track, and cloud and software architecture.
And software defined.
So there will be a lot of interesting stuff to watch there. And what I would like to add to what Markus already said, you hear the original content from builders there. And that's the matter why you should attend there.
Yeah, understand. Great. So just to recap, if you're joining us on the stream, we're live from the AWS Summit here in Berlin, Germany today. And the first piece of content that we have for you that you're watching right now is a panel discussion with AWS user group leaders from across Germany, which we're going to be hosting for around the next 15 minutes or so. So the question I wanted to ask is about recognition of user group leaders. So a couple of people that are on the panel hold special status with AWS as community heroes, which is a program that we have to recognize advocates in the AWS community. And I just thought, as we've got you here, it might also be good just to briefly focus with you, Markus, and you, Thorsten, about what the Community Heroes program is, what it feels like to be a member of that, what kind of responsibility and power comes with that position in the community. So can you maybe talk briefly about that? How did you get inducted into the program, and what does it mean to be an AWS community hero?
There are responsibilities. You never said that. Thorsten and me are AWS community heroes. So the idea behind the program is that there is a group of people, I think we're now 55, 60, something like that worldwide, that are recognized by AWS, that we're doing, at least in the opinion of AWS, great stuff for the community. So the benefit of what, at least for me, you can add to that later, for me is that we have very direct connections to AWS. It gives us a better view about how AWS works internally, which helps us to communicate a little bit in a different or better way to the community about how to approach AWS, how to solve things as a customer of AWS, because we have those insights at some point. Another benefit is that we're unfortunately under NDA, but we're able to see things, new services, and really give feedback directly to the service teams. So whenever somebody talks to me at my user group and tells me about, hey, this service is really great, but this or that is missing, and it happened that I am on a call with the service team, I can directly loop that feedback back from my user group to the service teams in the US or wherever they are. So I think that's a huge benefit of generating that feedback loop in both directions. Like we as community heroes have that kind of information and are able to communicate in a little bit different or better way for the customers and for the community. But also if the community gives us information like feedback on services, what AWS should build, we are able to directly feed that back to AWS. But
yeah, and another thing that's part of this NDA part is we get some heads up on some information. So when new service is there, we can, yeah, when it's done GA and really announced, we can handle it in a community event, in a meetup, and already have information so we can help customers or users on the meetup directly, not, okay, I saw it yesterday, so I can tell you next time, so we can tell them right now what's it about and so on. So the what's new section is more a deep dive because we can really say what it's doing, not, okay, I read the headline of the blog post.
Great, excellent. And I must say that I'm privileged to work with community heroes from across Europe, Middle East and Africa, certainly in my role, and great bunch of individuals to engage with that are doing a lot of really interesting and challenging things with the platform. A really cool group of people to work alongside. So we're almost at wrap-up time. I've almost exhausted the questions that I've got on my pad here. So I have two closing questions for you, and we'll start over with the Dortmund team, Sven and Tom at the end there. So my first question is, when's your next meetup, and how can individuals that might be interested in attending find out more about it? And my second question is, what are your future plans for the AWS user community that you lead? What would your idea of success be over the course of the next 2 years for your community, for example?
So I may just start with our next meetup. So it will be, as ever, at Materna in Dortmund, and it will be on the 4th of July. And I really hope that Dirk will give the talk there, and currently we plan to do it as a hackathon. So Dirk Fröner is also today here, and he's giving a session like in serverless computing, and I would like to do the same one then at the user group. So that's also good. You can ask the guys to do the same talks at the user group again, so no, not so much preparation.
Take it out on the road around the country on a little bit of a mini tour. Makes us feel like rock stars.
Yeah.
So what about the future plans for your user group, Tom? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, for the future, we would like to have more talks from the community. We had 2 by now. So users from Dortmund and the other one from, I don't know. And yeah, we also would like to have another sponsor because we only have one at the moment, the company we work for, it's Materna in Dortmund. So this is blessing and curse at once. So we always have a location and we always have catering, but we would like to get around some.
Yep, understand.
Like
yeah, the matter of funding these user groups is quite an interesting discussion point. Probably not something that's great for a panel like this, but I'll just say that there's a lot of work goes on behind the scenes to make sure that these user groups can run. It's a little bit like the swan or duckling effect. On the surface, the meetups are just happening, but when you look underneath the water, those flippers are paddling hard to make sure that there's enough organizational bandwidth and money to make those meetups happen. So if you are in a position to support these communities, I would really encourage you to do so wherever you are in the world. They need sponsorship and support from a cash and also organizational perspective to make them work. We at AWS don't want to exert influence over the communities, so we want them to run at arm's length, and this is the reason that we prefer to have sponsors from the community involved in user groups rather than be directly involved as a first party. So Markus, can you answer the same 2 questions? Plans for your next meetup, and then looking forward a little bit further, what do you intend to do with the group in Munich over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so the next meetup will be on next Tuesday. So it's the 12th of June. And we will be at Loyalty Partner Solutions, which is Payback in the end, as we're also traveling around over Munich to different offices. We will have talks about, I think one is security and monitoring of a whole serverless stack. So X-Ray, Lambda, CloudWatch. We touch a lot of things in there. Also IAM, stuff like that. You can hopefully attend, but I think there is already a waiting list for the next meetup. But just search on meetup.com for the AWS User Group Munich or Stuttgart or Dortmund, respectively, and add yourself to the group, and then you can RSVP for the event. On the future plans, I would love to say I want to grow the group. Unfortunately, we're running out of space in Munich, as we have something like 100 to 120 attendees every month. That obviously needs a lot of space and a lot of catering and a lot of sponsors involved in there. So I'm unsure if I really want to grow the group in the future. Hopefully it will happen, obviously. But I think for the future thing, I would love to see more like the AWS Community Tech Days, for example, like doing this in a more conference stuff, multi-day, maybe doing a community weekend, stuff like that. So really providing something new, maybe different formats of what we're right now having in this monthly gatherings, doing the same socializing with the same socializing effect in the end for multiple days, also in localized or regional. This would be kind of cool.
Great. What about you, Thorsten? What's your next meetup and your plans for the next couple of years for Stuttgart?
So the next meetup is next week Thursday at Opitz Consulting, and they will show their IoT solution for with the table soccer. So I'm really eager to see this. And our plans for the future...
It's related to the World Cup, but I guess it is.
I guess it is. And yeah, for the future, we want to grow the attendees because we have around 20 to 30 attendees, and there is room for more. So feel free to come. And for the future, we discuss having some kind of workshops or hackathons, additionally to the regular meetups, to really do deep dives with technical stuff and so on.
Yeah, this is an idea that's been run by the user group in London, England right now with alternating meetups. So they have a meetup one month, which is actually quite large, 300 to 400 people. And then the alternate month, they run focus workshops on particular topics like serverless or mobile app development on AWS, these kinds of topics. So that's something that's worked pretty well there. We can obviously help you with that idea if you want to try and roll it out in Stuttgart. Okay, that's my questions. We've got 6 minutes left, and we've got a few people in the audience here. Does anybody have any questions from the room that they want to ask of the panel before we wrap it up today? Just throw your hand up if you've got a question. Okay, if you tell me, I'll repeat it on the mic so that we can hear it on the stream.
Hello, this is Stefan Mazanik from User Group in Dresden. My question would be, how do you engage your community to get more topics for talks, to find people that give a talk? Because we see the problem that it's quite difficult to find people that actually are willing to provide a talk.
This goes to you. We have the same problem.
Okay, so in terms of how do you get the topics or what are the interesting topics, as we're doing this recent announcement talk, I sometimes just ask questions about who's using this or that service. Just raise your hand. And so I get an idea about what kind of services are the more interesting one. And for example, there is this call center service from AWS. How is it? Connect.
Connect.
Yeah. And when AWS Connect came out, I was like, okay, who's using or who wants to use AWS Connect? Who has this use case? Nobody raised hands. So from there on, I obviously know a talk about AWS Connect would be nice, but not so much on the informational, interesting side. So I get some kind of information out there just by asking people in the end. And the recent announcement, or the what's new, like you call it, I think is a good chance because you're touching every month nearly every service. And so whenever you're asking something like, hey, who's using EC2, everybody will raise hands, most probably. But then you get an idea about, okay, these are the more interesting services for my user group. These are the not so interesting services about my user group. And then from there on, you also know who's using these services. And if you're doing this for a longer time, then you will see familiar faces inside of your user group more often. And then you know, okay, this guy actually raised hands when we're talking about Amazon Redshift. So just approach them and say, hey, you said you're using Amazon Redshift, are you able to talk about it? If not, what are you interested in learning about Amazon Redshift? What are your problems, stuff like that? And then maybe either reach out to AWS and ask for a solution architect or an evangelist if there's nobody around there. Or, as I said, then you at least have an idea who's using what. And sometimes we all know people need the push of, yeah, you can do that. You can be on stage. Of course, you can tell people about what you're doing. It's not so much about not everything needs to be a deep dive. Not everybody needs to be an expert just by being on stage. It's more about explaining what you are doing with that kind of services or how you connect to services. It doesn't need to have always level 400. It's also interesting just to get new ideas about how people use that stuff. And if, at least that's my experience, if you tell people more about it and give them the confidence of, yeah, what you just told me is interesting enough to be on stage, you should tell that to the whole user group. And then you find more and more speaker, and then you can rotate between those speakers, like, hey, you already did a talk, it was a great talk, great experience, can you do another one more on this specific topic, stuff like that.
There's a really interesting dimension there about nurturing new talent, nurturing new members of the community that might not be experienced speakers and bringing them forward. And I think that's a really valuable aspect, not just of AWS meetups, but of tech meetups more generally, that they can nurture young talent, maybe give people an opportunity to do things in the context of these communities that they just don't get an opportunity to do in their everyday work. I think that's a really nice dimension.
And obviously it's a lot easier to talk in front of 20, 30, 40, maybe even 100 people than being on a AWS Summit stage with 1,000 people in the room and having a Twitch live stream running, pointing at your face.
No pressure.
Not at all. But I think if from my experience, I also started with doing AWS user group and doing talks there, and then growing to AWS Summit Berlin and did talks here, and then growing to AWS reInvent and did talks in Vegas in front of 2,000 people in the same room, which is a lot more pressure than just having a camera back in the room. Yep. But I think it's the same for you, Thorsten, right?
Yeah, you grow into this. And it's a really good thing for the attendees or for the speakers, for user groups. Just try it out. There are 20 people in the room. They won't kill you. So
hopefully.
Normally.
Yeah. At least in Germany.
Yeah. So just try it out. And lower the barrier by don't do an expert talk, because people are afraid to do expert talks. Yeah. Just tell what you're doing. And normally it gets an expert talk because they're experts, because they're doing it.
Yep. 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 You can also ask for help. I saw a really interesting talk at a user group in the UK where an individual went to the front of the room and said, "This is the problem that I'm trying to solve. I have no idea how to do it." And it actually turned into the audience giving the talk rather than the speaker, which was kind of an interesting way to do it as well. Yeah. Okay, we've got 30 seconds left on our allotted time, so we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you for your question, and thanks for everybody in the room that joined us for this session, the first of the day, on what you can get out of an AWS user group. My call to you would be to participate in these communities. Wherever you're from in the world, you'll find an AWS user group local to you. We have them in the Arctic Circle, and as far south as Argentina and in Australia. So wherever you are from, wherever you work, wherever you live, if you're interested in learning more about AWS, the peer-to-peer community and user groups is a great way to do that. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.